Hey everybody, PCB Junkie here. What I have in front of me is the old Sony CRT television that I RGB modded a few months back. Now unfortunately this TV has developed a number of issues recently, and in a state that it's currently in, I can no longer use it for what I need it to do. Since I still need a TV like this, I have no choice but to open it up and fix it, and in the meantime I thought this may be a good topic for another video. Since the problems with this TV tend to be pretty common with TVs of this type and this age, I figured making a video like this may come in handy for you guys if you ever run into similar issues with your RGB modded or CRT TVs that you want to keep, and maybe a video like this will also help you fix those issues. So let's dive in a little bit deeper and talk about the problems with this TV, and then we can talk about finding ways to actually fix them. So before we run through all the problems with this TV, what I'm using for testing is one of the projects that I've actually been developing, and this is an arcade JAMA compatible test card that tests various functions of a super gun or a monitor. Basically it's meant for cabinets, testing power supplies and monitors and the control panel inside of an arcade cabinet, and it'll come pretty handy for the type of testing that we need to do here. So let me show you now the TV and the problems that I've encountered with this TV, and then we'll talk about what I think is causing them and what I think we need to do to fix each one of them. Okay, so the first issue is probably the major issue that I have with this TV, and that is the complete lack of green. So this color here, I know that there's a lot of flashing on the video. Please ignore that. That's just the artifact of the recording, trying to record a CRT TV with a fast camera. The green is supposed to be here. Now you see just a placeholder, gray. I know the colors may not be showing correctly, but this is kind of a gray. It's actually missing the green component of the gray, but anyway, we're supposed to have red, green, and blue here, and this is the darker red, green, and blue. So as you can see, the green is missing completely. Now the other colors are just a combination of these RGB colors, and of course, since the green is missing here and here, we're just getting the red and the blue. And this is this pattern is generated by the test card that I just showed you a few seconds ago. So that's the first issue. Now, interestingly enough, if I switch to another video channel and come back, you can see that the green is actually functioning correctly. So I know for a fact it's not a problem with the tube or the neck of the tube. The circuitry going to the tube seems okay, and in fact the character generation circuitry is working just fine. So it is either a problem with the inputs, so the RGB inputs that I installed myself, or the black level circuitry. And the reason I know it's the black level circuitry is because when this TV was starting to have these issues, the green would never be completely gone. So even the black areas of the screen here, they would show a little bit of a green hue, and this got worse and worse progressively, and eventually the green just took over completely, and then one day it simply disappeared. So an issue like this that creeps in over time and gets worse is usually caused by one thing, and that's electrolytic capacitor failure. So we'll have a look at the capacitors in and around the black level circuit and the input circuit, and we're just basically going to replace all of them, and that should give this TV a little bit of a new life. The next problem is, let me just switch over the mode. Okay, The next problem has to deal with, well, there are actually two things here that we can see. First one is the convergence. Again, this is not showing quite right, but on this side you can see quite a bit of blue, and on this side you can see quite a bit of red. And if I travel all the way up to the top, the blue and the red converges quite nicely here, and that's also true for this corner. But when I go down further, you can see how the colors diverge at the bottom. So this is a convergence problem, and this can be adjusted with some magnets at the back of the neck of the tube. Another problem that you may have noticed on the screen are these colored bars on top. So what normally causes this is a slow failure in the vertical deflection circuit, and that circuit is responsible for pulling the electron gun up and down on the screen. And as that circuit becomes weaker, it's not able to pull the electron beam all the way up to the top, or sometimes it pulls it up too far and that beam ends up bouncing back down. And what you end up seeing is either an image that is not fully stretched all the way to the top, or an image that's stretched too much and it ends up kind of warping and curving back down. And just like the other issue, this one also crept in over time. So just maybe a month or two ago, this line wasn't at all visible, and recently it's getting worse, and it's kind of crawling down a little bit more each day. So again, this is a electrolytic capacitive failure in that circuit, and that circuit will require a little bit of attention. We're going to go over that circuit and replace all the capacitors in that, and that should get rid of this issue. So this is the third issue that I've encountered with this TV. Let's talk about the next one. And finally, the last problem here is a problem with one of the speakers. I've been playing a lot of arcade games on this one, and I guess I probably overdid it a little bit with the volume, and it ended up breaking one of the speakers. If I use my test card to play a sound, I don't know if the camera will be able to pick it up, but there's a pretty annoying distortion in the right side speaker. So let me show you that, and hopefully you can all hear it. Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure if that was very clear in this video, but yeah, that speaker definitely will need some attention. Here's the schematic diagram for the Sony television, and as far as the color is concerned, the missing green, what I'm suspecting are these three capacitors here. So that's pin 19, pin 21, and pin 23. And I'm sorry if the image quality isn't the best, but this PDF just isn't very good quality. If we look at the data sheet for the Chroma IC, the pin 19, 21, and 23 are actually dedicated for a capacitor connection for auto cutoff of RGB. And I have a feeling that the capacitor responsible for doing the auto cutoff magic for the color green is faulty. So I'll just end up replacing the three capacitors, and hopefully the green will come back. So let's do that first, and then see what happens with that. So right after pulling the main board out of this TV, I went directly for the 3 capacitors that I was initially suspecting of having an issue, and these 3 capacitors are these, and they're not electrolytic, they're actually ceramic, which is a bit of a surprise. I don't know how I feel about this. I'm going to replace them anyway and see if that makes any difference. But in the meantime, this whole section around the YC jungle has a bunch of other electrolytics. So what I think I'll do is I'll just basically replace every single one of these guys and see if that fixes it. But just to prove a point, I'm going to take these guys out first, replace them, and then see if my initial assumption was correct. And here is the right side speaker. So as you can see, it's not so much that it was overused and blue, but the surround is just completely deteriorated due to old age. So unfortunately there's no way to salvage this, and we'll just basically toss it and replace it with another speaker that's of a similar size. And I think I have just the replacement for it. In fact, it may even be a Sony. So I've gone ahead and replaced most of the caps in the YC jungle section and also in the vertical deflection section. And I'm going to show you that in a second. So actually the great thing about this TV is, as you can see here, there is a demarcation line for every single section of this TV. And of course this one here is the YC jungle section, so it makes it really easy to do any sort of work that you may need to do on a TV like this. The board is well labeled, not only on the top but on the bottom side as well. Let me show you. Not sure if it's very clear, but basically all the caps, resistors, they're all labeled on the back. You can clearly see where everything is. Makes working on this TV just a really good experience. So let's jump back here again for a sec and talk about these caps right there. So initially I did want to replace them, but looking through the bag of capacitors that I have, I actually don't have these values. These are 0.1 microfarad caps, and they're not actually ceramic, they're mylar, and so I don't really have a good substitute for these. And I figured you know, I'll just take them out of circuit and test them with the LCR meter and see what happens, and they actually all turned out to be perfectly fine. So if they're perfectly fine, then I guess there may be something else wrong with the circuit, and that's why I just simply decided to replace every single one of these caps. Not done quite yet, but getting there. And down here, as you can see, this section is labeled as well. It is where is that label? I cannot see. Actually, it's yeah, there it is. So vertical deflection section right there. There are only a few caps, so I replaced those, and basically we're gonna go ahead now and test this TV and see if we get any improvement. Okay, so everything is safely tucked away. All the high voltage wires are in the proper position, and we're not going to short anything out by the looks of it. So let's power this TV on and see exactly what we get. And it's still warming up. No picture yet. Okay, that's a little bit unusual. Actually, what I started to notice just before I opened this TV up, and for the last maybe a couple weeks, the warm-up time has been increasing, and very recently, this TV took maybe 30-40 seconds to warm up, which I figured was quite unusual. But now I'm thinking maybe the failure is now serious enough that it's preventing the TV from turning on, because as you can see, there is still some sort of an issue there. And now I'm starting to wonder whether there is a different problem here. Let me just see. Well, actually, this chip is a little bit warmer than it should be. I don't see anything loose here. This always wobbled back and forth like that. And this TV is still not warming up. Okay, so let's have a look and make sure I didn't short anything out, and then we'll come back and try to figure out exactly what's going on with this. The TV will still not turn on. I checked the power supply outputs. They look okay. I unplugged most of the plugs coming into and going out of the YC Jungle section, and it's not helping. So given that this chip is pretty warm, I may have to quit right here, as it's probably just not worth fixing this any further. I mean, it could be something very trivial, and it could just be a capacitor that I haven't yet replaced. But just thinking back about how this chip gets a little bit too warm, and how things started to fail, and specifically going back to how the green was visible in the OSD menu but not from any other input, and really the only inputs going to this chip are the RGB lines from the closed captioning circuit, and the video inputs from the back of the TV or the tuner. I really don't see how this could be external now. It actually may be in the chip itself. The failure may be with the chip, and it started off as just a failure of the green section, but it just it snowballed into a total failure where this chip is now simply dead. So if that's the case, I'm just going to be simply wasting my time here. And it may be worthwhile to continue if this TV was a decent model, but this is an entry-level Sony from that period. It's probably the bottom of that class, and even today it's not without issues. As you remember, the speaker here is completely destroyed. The other one is falling apart. The paint on this TV isn't perfect. It's crappy paint that's started to chip and flake off. So it's just not gonna be worth to continue, honestly. I don't know how you guys feel about this. I'm sure you'll leave me a bunch of thumbs down for this, but yeah, I just don't see how spending any more time on this is the right thing to do. And so, no matter what I do, this light just continues to flash. I've done a couple of additional checks. I looked at the deflection, and I looked at the tube itself, the neck. I can see that it does have a glow, and also if I turn up the high voltage, I can see that there's a raster on the tube itself, so I can see that something is being drawn on it. In fact, if I switch this to tuner input, I can hear the static as well on the channel that's being tuned in. So most of the TV is working quite well, except for video. There's just simply no video anymore. Well, I'll have to conclude then that it's the chip here, and it agrees with what I've been reading on the internet about this light flashing, and if that's the case, then it just doesn't make sense to continue on. And since I wanted to make this video informative, let's briefly talk about what normally would need to be done to fix issues with a TV like this, or well, especially issues that develop over time. So most of those issues are caused by a failure in the electrolytic capacitors, the electrolyte venting or drying out, and the capacitors losing their capacitance, and over time it affects the rest of the circuit, and problems get worse. And sometimes problems are affected by cold or heat, so they may get better after they warm up, or they may get worse after they warm up. It all depends, right? So the normal solution to a problem like this is basically to replace all the electrolytic capacitors. And if you know what section is affected, you can do it section by section. But of course, you know, capacitors after a certain age, they'll all pretty much start failing. So, you know, when the TV becomes 20, 30 years old, it's basically a ticking time bomb. At some point, you know, one or two or three capacitors here or there are going to start failing, and then it's kind of like it's a never-ending game, you know. So the best thing would be, I would just recommend replacing every single one, you know, if possible. If you really like the TV and you want to keep it, if it's expensive and you know, it's irreplaceable, you're better off probably doing this and just replacing every single capacitor. Yes, it will take a while. As you can see, there are a number of them here. There's probably at least 50 of them, but you know, that's really the only way to keep a TV like this alive. Now, if this is your first time and you have no experience with electronics, I would recommend that you maybe leave this for somebody with a little bit more experience. Mainly because, you know, there are many dangers lurking for you inside of a TV like this. There are plenty of places where there's enough voltage and current to give you a good zap, and maybe even do a little bit more damage than that, or possibly even kill you. So, you know, of course, before you open up a CRT television, do yourself a favor and read up a little bit about it. Don't just dive in. You know, make sure you understand how a TV like this works and where the dangers are, so you can avoid them. I'm going to end it here, unfortunately, on this somewhat negative note, and for the next one I will attempt to get a much better television, something that if anything like this happens again, I'll be more motivated to stick with it and try to fix it. For this one, it's just not worthwhile, in my opinion. So we'll leave it at that, and I hope you've enjoyed this video so far, and if you have, you know, don't forget to subscribe or leave a like, or maybe even comment. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, everybody.